Happy Saturday, everybody, and welcome back to the Kota Capper's College Football Computer Show, featuring myself at Kota Capper Pace, and alongside me, like the first three episode 4, Dan Angel 11, the computer man himself. Dan, how are we doing on this Saturday? We're into October, almost November, Dan.
I know. And somehow my German soccer team is still in first place, so I'm going to ride that for as long as possible.
There we go. And you put out some FCS rankings too for the computer show. So we might not touch on that a ton, but because I know you're still trying to figure out the numbers and stuff like that, but just kind of let the people know what'd you do for the FCS this week?
So basically with so last week I played a couple FCS games with East Tennessee State and Merrimack because I've been tracking the FCS teams all season long. I started that at the beginning of the year by pretty much the same way that I started with the FBS teams when I first did this. I gave each team a starter rating and just let the computer do its work from there. And both those games, there was a disparity of at least a touchdown between what Vegas was putting out and what the computer was putting out. So I parlayed both on the Buccaneers and the Warriors to cover those numbers, and both did so fairly comfortably for a pretty nice parlay cash for me. So I figured, okay, at this point, the computer is starting to get a pretty good read on some of these FCS teams. So let's go ahead and put out its weekly picks. So I'm like, I can't stress enough that these are still somewhat unofficial because in some cases, the Ivy League, especially, the computer only has like 2 or 3 weeks of data on these teams as opposed to several years for the FBS teams. But it's doing pretty well. So there's a good chance that a good chunk of these games are going to hit as far as the winners go.
Yeah, for sure. Love to see that. Obviously, North Dakota State takes on South Dakota State. Jackrabbits coming to the Fargo Dome here on Saturday. So, Dan, I think the computer had them North Dakota State by 3, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. Which that should be a really interesting game because South Dakota State's won the past 2 meetings, but obviously the Jackrabbits haven't gotten it done in the playoffs and the Bison have. And I think North Dakota State might be coming in feeling a little bit disrespected here. Granted, the Bison have gotten disrespected because they've made several mistakes with football that are really uncharacteristic of their program. But I think in this rivalry game, they might put it together because everyone is saying that South Dakota State's caught and passed them, and that probably isn't going to go over too well in that locker room.
Yep, for sure. Cam Miller, Bison quarterback, has never beat South Dakota State, so should be a good test for him on Saturday as well. So check out that game as well. We'll be following it closely. Again, Dan Angel 11. I'm Kota Capper Pace, and this is the computer show. So Dan, let's start obviously in the ACC with the Power 5 conferences here. Last week, 6-1 straight up. The computer did 4-3 against the spread. Clemson -3.5 this week. The computer has them by 7 against Florida State.
Yeah, Clemson, I mean, if they get this one, then they're in really good shape as far as making the ACC title game goes. And Florida State seems to be kind of a good but not great team. Like they've been able to win the games they should. They haven't done it in the games where it might be a little bit of a stretch to expect a victory. They've lost to both Wake Forest and NC State. Clemson's beaten both those teams. The one thing that I'm worried about is that Clemson might get caught looking ahead to Syracuse, which that sentence sounds so ridiculous on its face, given where the Orange have been. But if Clemson wins this game and beats Syracuse, then there's no stopping them from the ACC title game. So I think it's going to be a low-scoring game, and I think Clemson is probably going to do enough to get the cover here.
I love it. Underdog money line team, Dan, that I hear barking. Duke possibly over UNC, maybe UNC -7. The computer has the Tar Heels by 4 over Duke. What do you like here?
Yeah, Duke has played really well this year. I mean, David Cutcliffe did a great job changing the culture in Durham. Like 20 years ago, Duke actually once sued and won in court to get out of a series with Louisville because Duke some administration decided that the football team was just too awful to play those games, and the courts actually agreed with Duke. So of course now they're conference rivals, but yeah. But since then, I mean, Duke has actually become something not horrible. They've gotten a little bit stale the past couple years as Cutcliffe kind of ran out of steam, but Mike Elko seems to have things moving in the right direction. And North Carolina, is just a head scratcher at times. Like the Tar Heels kind of played down to their competition at times. I mean, the App State game was a great example, and Duke has played very well when North Carolina has made that 8-mile trip to Durham. So I think the Blue Devils might not win it, but I think they can cover the 7.
Again, if you're looking for all of our plays at CotaCappers.com on, of course, the interwebs, check those out. Got a lot of plays for Saturday. Like I said, I'm going to put Duke, Dan, in. I like them money line, at least a half unit. We'll see. I do like the +7 as well. I think you do it too here in your article as well. So I love it. The Big 12 straight up 3-1 last week, 2-1-1 against the spread. Again, how is Kansas a 9-point underdog against Oklahoma, considering what Oklahoma just did last week, right? The computer has this in a close game. Kansas by 3 over Oklahoma.
Yeah. And the reason that Kansas is underdog is because Kansas hasn't beaten Oklahoma since 1997.
Yep.
And granted, Kansas didn't get to play Oklahoma every year. Like when Mark Mangino had his best teams, those were the years that Kansas was scheduled to play Oklahoma State instead of Oklahoma. So the Jayhawks never got to face the Sooners. Granted, the Sooners ripped Missouri twice that year, so that might not have gone well for KU. But as I said in the piece, bringing up 2007 again, this feels a lot like Oklahoma is that Nebraska team that had the facade ripped away by Missouri and then got drilled by Kansas, and it was just a complete collapse from there. I'm just not buying Oklahoma as a solid team anymore. I think the Sooners, something is seriously wrong there. Brent Venables does not seem to be head coach material, and Lance Leipold has done a great job with Kansas. This might be the time for the Jayhawks to finally break through.
I think for this one too, Dan, you're almost looking at like who's the better coach, right? You have to go with Kansas. You just have to.
Yeah. I mean, there aren't many coaches that I would take over Lance Leipold. I mean, the guy has won everywhere that he's been, and he's won in some very difficult jobs. Like before coming to Kansas, Buffalo is not an easy place to win, and he had a lot of success there. Yep. So, yeah, if Kansas is smart, they'll find a way to extend him and hang on to him before somebody can snap him up.
Yeah, for sure. And they should have money, right? Kansas, a big basketball school. Maybe not.
Yeah, I think they just won a national championship in there somewhere. So they've probably got a few dollars in Bill Self's couch cushion.
Oh, I love it. All right, let's go to the Big 10. 2 perfect picks last week. You love to see that from the computer. 5-1 straight up, 3-3 against the spread. We could start really anywhere here. We can start with Illinois, a 6.5, 7-point underdog. The computer has them winning outright against Minnesota here.
Yeah. So Minnesota, I don't really know for sure if the computer has a good read on the Gophers or not, because obviously Minnesota lost that game to Purdue when the Gophers were not at full strength, and they got punished a little harshly because Purdue was coming off the Florida Atlantic escape where Aiden O'Connell didn't play. So the computer didn't have Purdue rated as highly as it probably should have, and Minnesota bore the brunt of losing that game to an underrated Purdue. That said, I do think Illinois is rated where it should be, and I think the Illini can definitely win this game. I mean, they're coming off a really strong defensive performance, and good defenses have really confused Minnesota in the Fleck era. So, yeah, I think the Illini, they might not win it outright, but I think +6.5, that's a really solid bet.
Again, the computer doesn't take into account injuries, right, Dan? So last I saw DeVito.
That and weather are its biggest weaknesses.
Yep, for Illinois, last I did see DeVito. I don't think he's going to play, but again, he's kind of a game time decision. So again, keep that in mind.
But Illinois, I mean, the way that their offense runs, the quarterback doesn't really mean all that much as it does for someone like a Purdue. Yeah. So DeVito, I mean, you should take that into account a little bit, but I don't think it'll hurt the Illini quite as much as the Boilers losing O'Connell did.
Yep, for sure. Purdue here -13.5, but the computer has them by 20 over Nebraska.
Yeah. So I think the computer is still figuring out what to do with Purdue because of the O'Connell injury. When a team loses a key player like that early in the season, the computer tends to take a fair amount to figure out what exactly to do with them, especially when that player returns with plenty of season to go. So, I mean, the computer had Nebraska pegged on last week perfectly. That was one of its perfect picks. And Nebraska still has to show that they can do it against a team with a pulse. I mean, they have 2 consecutive wins but those were over Indiana and Rutgers, and neither of those teams are likely to be anywhere near the top of the Big Ten East. So Purdue could be a dark horse in the West. So yeah, I'm kind of leaning toward giving the 13.5 with the Boilers here.
Sounds good. 2 touchdown favorite. I like that inside that number. So be sure to check that out as well. It's a good football number. Let's head west, Dan, to the Pac-12 last week. 3-2 straight up, 1-4 against the spread. You have Cal here, minus 14.5 by 20 over Colorado.
I mean, Colorado, there's just not really much more to say about them. I mean, if you've seen the SEC Shorts episode from 2 weeks ago, they said Colorado was a 7.5 point underdog to their bye week, and I kind of believe that. I mean, the Buffaloes just have not been good in any shape or form this year. And California, they're okay. I mean, they're not going to be a solid Pac-12 team by any means, but not horrible. And against a team as bad as Colorado, not horrible, should win out. I mean, the elevation does concern me a little bit, but Colorado is just so poor that it shouldn't matter.
Yeah, I'm down with you on that. SEC Shorts too. If you haven't seen it, check it out. Dan linked it in his blog, but it's great. Just type it in YouTube, SEC Shorts. Wonderful little clips there. So let's head to the SEC here, Dan. 6-1 straight up, 2-5 against the spread. I think all season long they've been pretty solid straight up. I think against the spread it's been a little bit of a struggle. But let's take on Georgia here. Minus 38.5. The computer has it right on the number by 38 against Vanderbilt.
Yeah, I mean, the computer ATS in the SEC has been as much of a struggle as Vanderbilt has winning games in the SEC. I mean, it's just been rough.
Yeah.
And numbers like these are why. I mean, it's tough to expect a team like Georgia or Alabama to cover giving more than 5 touchdowns. I mean, because at some point you start pulling starters, getting them back up some playing time, and you open the back door, or you're just not able to pull out that big of a cover because you're just not concerned about trying to embarrass a team. So I think I'd probably take a couple extra points here with Vanderbilt to be safe. Maybe tease that along with Alabama and get Alabama down to like a field goal and take Vanderbilt at getting 6 touchdowns, because Vanderbilt's gotten better, but if Georgia's focused, Georgia can still blow Vanderbilt off the map.
Yep, for sure. Let's go to Ole Miss here. It's my lock, minus 14.5. The computer has them by 17 over Auburn, Dan. So to me, I like this. I like this one.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, Ole Miss has really impressed this year without Matt Corral. I mean, the SEC Shorts joke was that they'd be heading to the Music City Bowl after losing such a valuable piece of their program, and it's just not happened this year. I mean, Ole Miss has really looked solid against some pretty decent competition. I mean, they were a little bit fortunate in that Kentucky game that the Wildcats turned it over at the end, but they've beaten a pretty solid Troy team who looks like a Sun Belt contender. They hammered Georgia Tech. Granted, Georgia Tech is horrendous, but beating them by 42 in Atlanta and not giving up a point, that's a pretty solid showing. And this offense is still pretty explosive, and now they do it on the ground. Ole Miss ranked 7th nationally running the football. So, yeah, I think Auburn might be in a little bit of trouble here. And the Tigers are 1-5 ATS on the year. So I think the computer's probably right on for this one.
Yeah, love to hear that. Let's head to Alabama and Tennessee. Obviously, a lot of eyes going to be on this one. Dan, Bryce Young, is he going to play? Is he not going to play? Alabama minus 7.5. I did see today when we're recording this on Friday, I think it jumped up to -9 Alabama, but the computer has the Bama by right on the number 7 over Tennessee.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the computer operating on the assumption that Young is a question mark, because the computer's most recent experience seeing Alabama was the Texas A&M game where they had to play without him for a good chunk of the time. So the biggest question here is Tennessee ready for this kind of moment? Because this is something that the Vols haven't experienced for a long time. Like, it's been well over a decade since Tennessee was last relevant. It's been, I think, 15 years since the Vols actually won a game in this rivalry. Nick Saban has never lost to Tennessee as Alabama's coach. So I don't know. I think Tennessee will handle the moment okay, but the Vols have been kind of iffy with the spread. They've come close to the number several times that the computers had. So I think this might be one where I tease them a little bit and get Alabama at a lower number.
Okay, I like that. I think that's a great choice as well. So, all right, let's head down to the non-power fives. Let's go Conference USA here. Dan, last week 3-1 straight up, 2-2 against the spread. I don't know, Middle Tennessee. What kind of team are they? I still can't really figure them out. But Western Kentucky, I know, has a pretty solid offense. They're pretty solid. -8.5. The computer has them by 13 over the Raiders, right? The Blue Raiders or something like that.
Blue Raiders, yep. Yeah. So middle, I mean, it's tough to figure out what exactly to expect from them because of how varied their outcomes have been. I mean, they start the year getting destroyed by James Madison, and then they turn the tables on Miami. I mean, figure that one out. That said, I like Western Kentucky here because the thing that you need to do to beat Middle Tennessee is throw the football. The Blue Raiders are terrible against the pass. They give up 283 yards a game. And Western Kentucky, even though Bailey Zappa is now playing for the Patriots, they still throw the ball a ton. I mean, the Hilltoppers rank third in the nation in throwing the football. Granted, part of that is because they dropped 73 on Florida International, but that's still a gaudy number. And I think covering this number is well within their capabilities. So, yeah, I think the computer is right here.
I like that. I got Western Kentucky on my card. Let's head to the Independents last week. 2-0 straight up, 1-1 against the spread. Buffalo -16.5. But boy, the computer loves them against UMass here by 31.
Yeah, and that's because Buffalo has played pretty well against some solid MAC competition. I mean, Miami has really been the computer's darling all year. The Redhawks beating Kent State when the computer was on them, and Vegas had Miami as almost a touchdown underdog to the Flashes. Miami was a big underdog against Northwestern, and the computer almost nailed that game exactly in picking Miami to win, and Buffalo beat Miami by 4. So since then, the computer has been pretty high on the Bulls. They came out strong against Bowling Green. The one worry I have here is teams go to UMass and they let off the gas in the third quarter once they've put the game away. But I think 16.5 is pretty reasonable with the computer expecting them to win by 31. So I think this is a situation where Buffalo should be pretty solid.
Yep. If you like Buffalo, maybe look at a first half play as well.
Mm-hmm.
You can definitely check that out. Another Independence game here that I'm eyeing, New Mexico -6.5 is the number by 11 over New Mexico State. Now this is New Mexico State's Super Bowl, right, Dan? So thoughts on this one here?
Yeah, it is New Mexico State's Super Bowl, but I mean, I don't really think it matters that much if it is or not, because New Mexico State has just been so poor. I mean, this is a team that managed to lose to Florida International when the Panthers were coming off getting drilled by Western Kentucky. So that kind of says where New Mexico State is at. I mean, this game's been somewhat close at times over the years because New Mexico is not really that great of a team either, but I think the Lobos should be able to put up more than enough points. I mean, I'd be interested to see where exactly the over is. Not that the computer does anything with that, but given how many points usually get scored in this game, the fact that it's only 38.5 while I'm taking a look at it, that seems pretty unlikely because like the lowest number that New Mexico has put up in the past 8 years of this rivalry is 28. And that was in a losing effort. So yeah, I think points could be scored here because these teams just can't stop each other. And I think that leads itself well to New Mexico covering this by a touchdown.
Yep, for sure. I like that. That's another good football number. That's head of the MAC here last week, 4-2 straight up, 3-3 against the spread. A lot of the spreads here, Dan, the computer actually agrees with. A lot of them are very, very close here, which is interesting to see. So let's go Miami at one that's not super close. Miami of Ohio -6.5. The computer has them by 11 over Bowling Green.
Yeah, well, I mean, as I said earlier, Miami has been the computer's darling all year long, and Bowling Green is just such a poor team. I mean, I still cannot figure out how Minnesota managed to lose to this Bowling Green team last year.
Hey, easy.
I'm sorry, but that is one of the biggest stains on PJ Fleck's resume that he somehow found a way to get beat by this team. And Bowling Green, I mean, you look at their schedule. They have an escape against Akron. They got steamrolled by Mississippi State and UCLA, and they have an overtime loss to Eastern Kentucky, which Eastern Kentucky is a good FCS team, but Bowling Green should still be winning that game.
Yep.
I mean, there really isn't anything that the Falcons do well, and they're coming off getting smacked around by Buffalo. mean, the Bulls just won that game by 31 at Bowling Green. So Miami plays pretty well on defense. They have a pretty solid running attack, and I don't see Bowling Green on being able to stop them at all. So this number I'm pretty comfortable with.
I like it. That's head of the Mountain West last week, 4-2 straight up, 3-3 against the spread. Utah State minus 10.5, but Colorado State, do they get a win here? Utah State by 4 over Colorado State.
Yeah. So Colorado State, I think, is getting a little bit of credit for how they did against Nevada, which, I mean, the computer has just come around to the fact that Nevada is terrible. So I don't know. I mean, Colorado State, man, both of these teams really have just been so poor this year. Both have multiple touchdown losses to Big Sky opponents, which really is a great argument for promotion and relegation in college football. I mean, Utah State is at least playing a little bit better. So this might be one where I think the computer is giving a little bit too much credit to Colorado State for that recent upset. So I think Utah State might be the play here.
All right. Sounds good. Now, I thought this one was interesting as well. Air Force minus 10.5. The computer has them by 6 over UNLV. San Jose State just got done boat racing, right? The running Rebels. So thoughts on this one here, Dan?
Well, Air Force really hasn't played all that well as of late. I mean, playing a tight game with Navy, okay, I can see that. Navy runs the same exact offense as Air Force. Those games are going to be low scoring. Both teams know how to defend each other. The talent gap isn't going to be too huge for two service academies. Fine. But Air Force then turns around and loses to Utah State.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's just something that cannot happen. So yeah, I'm not really loving what I'm seeing from Air Force, and neither is the computer. I mean, UNLV, the computer called that perfectly, that San Jose State was going to smack them around. The thing about UNLV's defense, the running Rebels are really weak against the pass. They're not weak against the run. They rank 39th in the nation at stopping teams on the ground. And San Jose State is a solid pass team that can't run the football. Of course, Air Force being a triple option team, a pass is really an adventure for the Falcons. Yep. So UNLV seems to have the right personnel to keep this close and possibly even win it, because if Air Force can't get the ground game going, they really don't have a plan B.
Love it. Let's go to the Sun Belt here to wrap up the show. Last week, 4-1 straight up, 3-2 against the spread. South Alabama minus 16.5, but the computer has them by 21 or more against Louisiana. Obviously, I don't know. This is an interesting game to me too. South Alabama looks pretty strong here, Dan, but can they cover by 3 touchdowns here?
I think they can. I mean, Louisiana Monroe, they managed to get that rivalry win, and they're coming off playing Coastal Carolina pretty good. But they're not quite the same team away as they are at home. Granted, a couple of those are because they've played Texas and Alabama away, which obviously, but they also got routed by Arkansas State when they went to Jonesboro. So this really seems to be a home turf hero that plays teams very tough when they're in Monroe, but just doesn't have it when they go on the road. All 3 of their covers this season have been at home. So South Alabama looks like they're legit. They nearly took down UCLA, and yeah, I think they can handle this number.
Sounds good. James Madison, obviously, for one of the opponents that the Bison have been familiar with, obviously now at the FCS level, minus 12.5 here. Computer has them by 14 over Georgia Southern. I took Georgia Southern. Upset of the week, Dan. I don't know what happens here.
I mean, this one could be interesting. It really depends on whether Georgia Southern can do anything to slow down James Madison's running game. I mean, JMU, their offense has been excellent, and their running game, this team averages 215 yards a game on the ground, and Georgia Southern has been getting just hammered on the ground. This team is giving up 226 yards per game, and part of that is because, I mean, they just really can't stop anyone. I mean, the game against Nebraska was just a shootout all the way around, but there's a reason that this team sees their totals regularly end up in the 60s, and it's because they don't play much defense. James Madison does play pretty good defense. So yeah, I think that Madison should be able to pull this out and cover this number.
All right. Sounds good. Let's go one more here before we give our plays of the week. Southern Mississippi -4.5 in a close one with Arkansas State here. Dan, computer has Southern Miss by 3.
Yeah, so it's always tough when a team is getting used to a new conference and new opponents. Southern Miss so far has actually seemed to adjust pretty well to life in the Sun Belt. They finally took their first spread loss of the season.
Yep.
So this team isn't really all that great on the offensive side of the ball. Granted, neither is Arkansas State. So it's tough to really say what's going to happen here. Arkansas State has played a lot of teams pretty well, and probably the one game that they really didn't handle all that well was James Madison. Granted, Southern Miss didn't handle Troy all that well. So it seems like these teams are on pretty similar levels, and I think that this will probably be a tight game, probably one that I want to stay away from.
All right. Sounds good, Dan. That's here. I think we're both 1 and 2 in our plays, right, for the show.
I think so.
But you did win. Let's see. Did you win yours last week? I think you did. Yes.
Yes, I did. Thank you, Miami.
Yes, that's right. And I did not win mine. So again, we'll have a nice graphic here. We can put those up. Dan, what do you have for this week here? Who are you taking as your pick?
All right. So the way I'm looking at this right now is the MAC has been good to me. So I think that I'm going to stick with the MAC here. And I am going to go with Ohio against Western Michigan. Ohio is, I think the line has actually moved since I put this up. The computer has Ohio by 5, but okay. Western Michigan is now favored by half a point on the line that I just saw. But Western Michigan is clearly not the same team that it was a year ago. Like, this schedule was made for an experienced Western Michigan team to play. And the Broncos got hit hard by players graduating and declaring for the draft early. And Ohio has seemed to bounce back pretty nicely over the past couple weeks. There was definitely a scare against Fordham, but they took Kent State to overtime. They had no problems with Akron. They also beat that Florida Atlantic team that nearly took down Purdue. And they can pass the ball pretty well. Like, Ohio used to be a run-heavy team when Frank Solich was running the show, but the Bobcats have changed their identity quite a bit. They're now throwing the ball a lot, and Western Michigan's defense is really not stopping anyone. I mean, Eastern Michigan just pounded the Broncos last time out, and they did it by throwing for 293 yards. So if Eastern can do that, then I think there's a good chance that Ohio can do it too.
All right. I like it. Dan looking for his second one to go 500. I had Duke last week that they couldn't get it done for me there. Just played from behind the whole game, and that was unfortunate. But Dan, I think I got a winner here. I know a lot of people, at least the money and the public too, is kind of all over this, but I like San Jose State. I'm a Mountain West guy. I want Boise to win it. It'll be interesting to kind of see where that comes down towards the end of the season. But San Jose State, man, they've looked so good.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, they lost last year to Fresno, obviously a different Fresno team. But I think they're like, hey, we're the better team here in this matchup. We can contend for a Mountain West title, and I think San Jose State can cover this by double digits or more. So we'll see. The computer has them by 12. The number's at -8 right now. It opened up at -4. Obviously, would have loved it at 4, but I think they can win by double digits here on the road in Fresno. So
I think that's a really strong play. I mean, Fresno has not looked impressive, and San Jose State looks very good.
Yep, they look to be on a mission here this year. So it should be fun. It should be fun, Dan. That is our Week 7 show. Of course, follow Dan on Twitter, DanAngel11. I'm Kota Capper Pace. You can follow the network, the Kota Sports Gambling Network, at Kota Cappers. And again, we will see everybody next Saturday. All righty. Peace.
Bye.